My stepfather charged me $500 a month rent to live in the garage. Now, he needs a place to stay. I, 28M, am currently sitting on the floor of my living room, backed up against the sofa, listening to the absolute silence of my house. My hands are still shaking a little, not from fear, but from the adrenaline crash of what just happened over the last 4 hours. To understand why I just legally destroyed the man who raised me, you have to understand the garage. When I was 7 years old, my biological father passed away from a sudden heart attack. It broke my mother in a way that I don't think she ever fully recovered from. She was vulnerable, scared, and looking for stability. Enter Paul. 2 years later, she married him. To the outside world, Paul was a saint. He was the guy who coached Little League, the guy who bought the first round at the bar, the guy who shook your hand with a firm grip and looked you in the eye. But inside the house, he was a scorecard keeper. Everything was a transaction. Affection wasn't given, it was purchased with obedience. If I got straight A's, I was allowed to eat dinner at the table. If I mowed the lawn perfectly, he wouldn't criticize my appearance for an evening. The dynamic shifted violently the day I turned 18. The morning of my birthday, I came downstairs expecting maybe a card or a generic happy birthday. Instead, I found a lease agreement sitting on the kitchen table next to a cold cup of coffee. Paul was sitting there, reading the sports section, not even looking up. He slid the paper toward me. "Welcome to the real world," he said. The terms were clear. Rent was $500 a month. But here's the kicker. I wasn't allowed to stay in my bedroom. That room, the one I'd grown up in, was now designated for guests or office space. I was being moved to the detached garage. It wasn't a finished garage. It was a single-car structure made of cinder blocks, uninsulated, concrete floor, one flickering bulb dangling from a rafter. I had a part-time job at a hardware store while I was trying to finish my senior year of high school. I was netting maybe $800 a month. He was taking more than half. I looked at my mother, who was standing by the sink washing dishes she had already washed. She wouldn't look at me. That was her signature move, staring at the floor or the wall while Paul bulldozed over us. "If you don't like it, leave," Paul said, finally looking me in the eye with that dead shark-like stare. "But good luck finding an apartment without a credit score or a deposit." I signed. I had nowhere else to go. For a year, I lived in that concrete box. In the winter, I could see my breath. I slept in 3 layers of clothes inside a sleeping bag on top of a cheap mattress I dragged out there. I wasn't allowed to use the main house bathroom after 9 p.m. because it disturbed their sleep. I learned to pee in Gatorade bottles. He charged me extra for electricity usage if he saw a space heater, so I just froze. It was psychological warfare. He wanted to break me. He wanted me to beg. One month, I was short $50. My beat-up Civic had thrown a rod and I needed to fix it to get to work to pay him. I explained this to him. I actually lowered myself to beg. He didn't say a word. He just walked out to the garage and put a padlock on the outside hasp. My clothes, my school books, my meager food stash, everything was inside. Rent is due on the 1st, no exceptions. It's a life lesson. I spent 3 nights sleeping in my broken-down car in the driveway until I could sell my acoustic guitar to a pawn shop to pay him the $50 plus a $100 late fee. I moved out 3 months later. I didn't say goodbye. I left the key under the mat, got in my car, and drove until the tank was empty. I spent my 20s working like a dog. I got into electrical work, joined the union, worked 80-hour weeks, saved every dime, and started investing in real estate right when the market dipped. I am now doing very well. I own a 4-bedroom home on 2 acres of land, fully paid off. I have a life. I have peace. Until 3 days ago. My mother called me. I hadn't spoken to her in 6 months, and even then it was brief. She was sobbing so hard I could barely understand her. "We lost the house," she choked out. I knew Paul was reckless with money. He liked new trucks and boats he couldn't afford, always needing to project that image of success. But I didn't know it was this bad. "The bank took it," she cried. "We have to be out by Friday. We have nowhere to go." Then I heard Paul's voice in the background. He snatched the phone away from her. "Look, we're packing up," he said, his voice clipped and authoritative. "We'll be at your place around 5 p.m. on Friday. Make sure the guest room is ready, and clear out your garage. I have a lot of tools I need to store." Not a question, a command, like I was still that 18-year-old kid in the garage. "No," I said. The silence on the other end was heavy. "Excuse me?" Paul's voice dropped that octave that used to make my stomach turn. It didn't scare me anymore. It just made me angry. "I said no. You aren't moving in." "I raised you," he shouted, the phone mic peaking. "I put a roof over your head. You owe me." "You charged me to live in a shed, Paul. We are not family. We are former business partners, and the partnership is dissolved." I hung up, but I knew it wouldn't be that simple. Paul was the type of man who viewed no as a challenge. Friday came. Today. I took the day off work. I wasn't going to be ambushed. I locked the heavy iron gate at the end of my long driveway. I checked my security cameras to make sure they were recording in 4K. I brewed a pot of coffee and waited. Around 4 p.m., a U-Haul truck rattled up the road, followed by my mother's sedan. They stopped at the gate. Paul hopped out of the driver's side of the truck. He looked older, his face red and puffy, but he still carried that arrogant swagger. He marched up to the keypad and punched in a code. It didn't work. I'd changed it that morning. He tried again. Then he started honking the horn of the U-Haul, long, aggressive blasts. My nearest neighbor is half a mile away, but it was still embarrassing. I walked out to the front porch, coffee in hand, and watched him. He saw me and ran to the gate, shaking the iron bars like a caged animal. "Open the damn gate," he screamed. "Turn around, Paul," I yelled back, my voice calm. "You're not coming in. This is illegal. You can't deny your parents shelter. It's elder abuse." "Actually, it's private property. You're trespassing. If you don't leave, I'm calling the sheriff." My mother got out of the sedan. She looked so frail. She was wearing a coat that looks too big for her. That part hurt. I wanted to help her, but I knew helping her meant letting the parasite in. Then Paul played his first dirty card. He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a crumpled piece of paper. He waved it through the bars. "I have mail addressed here," he shouted triumphantly. "I changed my address 2 weeks ago. I'm a tenant by law. If you don't let me in, I'm calling the police for an illegal eviction." My blood ran cold. This is a common scam. I knew about it because I work in real estate. If someone can prove they receive mail at a residence, the police will often throw up their hands, call it a civil matter, and force the homeowner to let them in until a court order says otherwise. He had been planning this. He knew they were losing the house weeks ago and set the trap.
Knew I would say no, and he had prepared a legal crowbar to force his way in. I walked down the driveway, stopping 10 feet from the gate. "Show me," I said. He smirked, that smug, punchable grin I remembered from my childhood. He pressed the envelope against the bars. It was a bank statement, addressed to him, at my address. The postmark was dated 3 days ago. "I live here," he sneered. "Open the gate, or you're going to jail." "You never spent a night here," I said. "This is fraud." "Doesn't matter what you think, matters what the law says. Call the cops. Go ahead. See who they side with." He was right about the risk. If the responding officer was lazy or unsure, they might force me to open the gate to avoid liability. Once he was in, getting him out would take 6 months of eviction court. I looked at my mother, who was weeping silently by the car. Then I looked at the U-Haul. I realized I had to play this carefully. I had to pivot. "Okay," I said. "You want to play the tenant game?" "I want my room," he said. "Fine, I'll open the gate. But we need to sign a formal lease. If you're a tenant, we do it by the book." He laughed, a harsh barking sound. "Whatever, just open it." I keyed the remote in my pocket, and the gate swung open. He looked at me with pure victory in his eyes. He thought he had won. He got back in the U-Haul and drove it up the driveway, parking right in front of my beautifully manicured lawn. He jumped out and started walking toward the front door with a box in his hands. "Not there," I said, stepping in his path. I pointed to a structure about 50 yards from the main house. It was an old tractor shed I used for storage. It was uninsulated, concrete floor, no windows, just a corrugated metal roof and some timber beams. "That's your unit," I said. Paul stopped dead. "You're joking. You said you're a tenant, you established residency at this address, but you didn't establish residency in the main dwelling. I'm the landlord. I get to designate the rental unit. That's the only space available. The main house is occupied. "I'm moving into the house," he spat, trying to push past me. I stepped in front of him again. "I'm not the scrawny 18-year-old he used to bully. I'm 6'2" and I lift heavy conduit for a living. I didn't budge an inch. You step foot in my house, and I will physically remove you for breaking and entering. That shed has a roof. It has power. It meets the legal definition of shelter. Take it or leave it." "I'm not living in a shed," he screamed, dropping the box. "I'm calling the police." "Do it," I said. And he did. We stood there in the driveway for 20 minutes waiting for the deputies. My mother sat on the bumper of the sedan, head in her hands. I didn't say a word to Paul. I just went inside the house for a moment to print a document. I have a good lawyer friend who helped me draft a standard lease agreement years ago for my rental properties. I made some adjustments on the fly. When the sheriff's deputy arrived, Paul immediately went into his act, the poor, abused senior citizen. "My son is trying to make us homeless. I have mail here. I live here. He's locking me out." The deputy, a guy who looked like he was tired of domestic disputes, looked at me. "Sir, is this true? Does he have residency here?" "He has mail here," I admitted calmly. "He claims he's a tenant. I'm not denying his tenancy. I'm offering him access to his unit." I pointed to the tractor shed. "That's not a house," he screamed. "It's a barn." "It has 4 walls, a roof, and electricity. It's a weatherproof structure. It's actually bigger than the room he rented to me when I was a teenager. I am acknowledging his right to be on the property, officer, but the main house is my private residence, and I do not have a lease with him for the main dwelling. His tenancy is for the outbuilding." The deputy looked at the shed, then at Paul. "Sir," the deputy said to Paul, "if the homeowner is offering you a space on the property and acknowledging you as a tenant, this is a civil dispute regarding the quality of the housing. I can't force you to let you into the main dwelling if he says that's not the agreed-upon unit. I can't determine which room is yours without a court order." Paul's face went from red to purple. He realized his mail trick had backfired. He had forced a tenancy, but he hadn't specified the room. He had played himself into a corner. "Fine," he hissed, his eyes full of hate. "We'll stay in the shed until Monday. Then I'm getting a lawyer and I'm suing you for everything you have. We'll see what a judge says about you putting your mother in a barn." "Great," I said. "Sign this." I handed him the clipboard I'd brought out. "What is this?" "Standard lease, just like the one you gave me 10 years ago. Rent is $500 a month, first and last due now, plus a security deposit. No kitchen access after 8 p.m., no guests, noise curfew at 9 p.m. And since it's a separate structure, no access to the main house. There's a spigot around the back for water. I'll provide a portable toilet." "You can't do this to your mother," he yelled, pointing at her. "Mom," I called out. She looked up. "You can come inside. You can have the guest room, full access, heated floors, private bath, kitchen, whatever you need, free of charge." Paul grabbed my arm. I flinched, but I didn't pull away. "She stays with me," he threatened. "Don't you dare split us up." "No," I said, removing his hand from my arm with slow, deliberate force. "She's an adult. She can choose." My mother stood up. She looked at Paul, then at the warm, inviting lights of the main house. It was getting chilly as the sun went down. The wind was picking up. "Paul," she said softly, "it's cold." "If you go in there, we are done," Paul threatened. "Don't you dare abandon me." She hesitated. The years of conditioning were strong. I could see the battle in her eyes. But the prospect of sleeping on a concrete floor in November broke the spell. She looked at me, and for the first time in years I saw a spark of defiance. "I'm sorry, Paul," she whispered. She walked past him, grabbed her overnight bag from the sedan, and walked up the steps into my house. Paul stood there, alone in the driveway. The power dynamic had completely inverted. The deputy got back in his cruiser, telling us to keep it civil, and drove off to the end of the driveway to finish his paperwork. "You're going to regret this," he said, his voice low and venomous. "I'm staying. I'm not paying you a dime. Squatters' rights. I'll make your life a living hell. I'll bring in trash. I'll make noise. You'll have to pay me 50 grand to leave." "Read the lease, Paul. Clause 4.
Any illegal activity on the premises voids the lease immediately. I'm not doing anything illegal. You sure about that? I pulled out my phone and opened a file I had saved. See, when Mom called me crying, I did some digging. I wanted to know how you lost the house you'd lived in for 20 years. I have a buddy who works in forensic accounting. We looked up the public records on the foreclosure. Paul's face went pale. The arrogance evaporated. You didn't just stop paying the mortgage, Paul. You took out a HELOC, a heavy equity line of credit 3 years ago, $150,000, and you forged Mom's signature on the documents. That's a lie, he stammered, backing up toward the truck. Is it? Because the notary listed on the documents is your cousin's wife. That's a conflict of
interest. And Mom told me 10 minutes ago inside the house, while you were screaming at the gate, that she had no idea there was a second mortgage. That's fraud, Paul. That's bank fraud. That's identity theft. That's a felony. I held up a manila folder I had been holding under the clipboard. I haven't called the district attorney yet. I wanted to give you a choice. He was shaking now, not from rage, but from fear. Pure, unadulterated fear. The choice is this, I said, stepping closer to him. You get in that truck. You drive away. You never contact my mother again. You sign the divorce papers she's going to send you, and you disappear. If you do that, I burn this folder. But if you stay in that shed, which is your right as a tenant, I will file a report with the FBI and the State Attorney General tomorrow morning. You'll have a place to stay, all right, but it won't be a shed. It'll be federal prison. He looked at the house where my mother was safe. He looked at the shed. He looked at the folder. He opened his mouth to speak, but nothing came out. He knew I had him. He knew I wasn't bluffing. He didn't say a word. He turned around, got in his truck, leaving the U-Haul behind because he couldn't even be bothered to hook it back up. He reversed down the drive, nearly taking out my mailbox, and sped off into the night. I stood there for a long time. I walked over to the shed and turned off the outside light. I walked back to the house and locked the front door. My mother was sitting at the kitchen table, her hands shaking around a mug of tea. "Is he gone?" she asked, her voice small. "Yeah, Mom, he's gone." I didn't tell her about the fraud yet. I'll let her sleep tonight. She needs the rest. Tomorrow, we get her a lawyer. Tomorrow, we start rebuilding her credit and her life. But tonight, she's safe. It's been 3 hours. I'm sitting here watching the footage of him leaving on a loop. Revenge isn't about hurting people. It's about holding up a mirror and letting them hurt themselves. Paul wanted to use the law as a weapon? Fine. I just made sure the weapon was pointed in the right direction. He wanted to live in a garage. He ended up on the street. I looked at the original lease he forced me to sign 10 years ago. I kept it framed in my office as a reminder of what not to be. I took it down and threw it in the trash. I don't need the reminder anymore. The U-Haul is still outside. It's full of his tools. I think I'll keep them. Call it a storage fee. If you enjoy stories about entitled narcissists getting absolutely wrecked by the consequences of their own actions, hit that subscribe button. It costs less than my stepfather's dignity.